DHS pauses vehicle stops in ICE deportation actions. This after two fatal shootings with agents not wearing body cams and victims who were not targets of enforcement. President Trump backtracks on tolls on the Strait of Hormuz. The United States launches another round of aerial attacks as Iran fires at Kuwait, Bahrain, and 3 tankers in the Strait. Will Congress impose new sanctions on Russian oil sales, a possibly pivotal economic lever to end the war with Ukraine? Texas Republican Congressman Michael McCall joins us. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. It's been a very long time, but I began my career as a journalist covering police news. Did so as a newspaper reporter in 3 different cities. In my experience, for what it's worth, fatal officer-involved shootings were a universal tragedy for the victim and those who love the victim, of course, but also for the officer who pulled the trigger. As I said, it has been decades since I did this work, but I do not believe humanity has changed much since then. Officers, local, state, or federal, do not by nature want to kill people, and their work is obviously dangerous. But tactics, training, leadership, then as now, matter. And the difference in those spaces can be the difference between life and death. Yet 9 people in our country have been killed by federal immigration officers under President Trump's aggressive immigration enforcement in his second term. 2 were American citizens. Others generally had deep ties to their communities. Many had no criminal record outside of their undocumented status. Some had permission to work here. 9 people killed on the streets of America. Accountability? At the moment, that is no more than a rumor. As an example, it took officials in Minnesota until yesterday to obtain evidence from the federal government in the killings of American citizens Renee Good and Alex Pretty. Both were killed in January. State officials in Maine and Texas, like those in Minnesota, are demanding evidence about ICE-involved killings last week in Houston and yesterday in Biddeford. In both cases, the men killed in Maine, Johann Sebastian Duran Guerrero, 25, of Colombia, and in Houston, Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, 52, of Mexico, were not the target of enforcement actions. Neither had criminal records. Our Camilo Montoya Galvez spoke today with the district attorney overseeing the Houston case.
After the investigation plays out, and if you find criminal wrongdoing, are you planning and are you prepared to prosecute federal agents?
As we go forward, and if the case and the evidence directs us that criminal wrongdoing occurred, we are more than prepared to file criminal charges against the people, regardless of whether or not they're federal agents or civilians. You can't come into our community, take someone's life, and then hide behind a badge.
In neither case that I just mentioned, Houston, Texas, or Biddeford, Maine, did ICE officials wear body cameras. Disputes about what happened and the threat posed to ICE agents have only deepened the sense of revulsion over current ICE tactics.
It's a tragedy on several levels. It's a tragedy for the family of this young man who was killed unnecessarily. It's a tragedy for our country that we're going through this process that's based on a phony premise. The whole premise of this has been the worst of the worst. Well, in Maine last winter, they arrested over 200 people. 19 of them had criminal records. That means 90% of the people arrested had no criminal records.
Today, the Department of Homeland Security paused vehicle stops as part of removal operations. ICE had used vehicle stops after surveilling those subject to removal. And they did, though, especially in cases where they did not have legal permission to enter a residence. And it frequently uses unmarked cars in these enforcement actions, which adds to confusion and fear on the streets. Demands to meet deportation quotas add pressure to these removal operations and, by their very nature, increase the risk of mistakes, sometimes fatal ones. And the Trump administration has resisted efforts of states and localities to investigate independently fatal ICE-involved shootings. Here's Maine Senate Republican Susan Collins.
What you can't have is ICE investigating itself. It would be helpful and add even more credibility if the state police were involved in the investigation, so I support that.
We begin tonight in Maine with Lilia Luciano. Lilia, walk us through what we're learning about the shooting and what's happening at the state level.
Major, you bring such an important point. The lack of those body cameras make these investigations extremely difficult. I have been talking to locals who were witnesses either because they heard the shooting or people who rushed out after to try and piece together what happened. We were able to obtain one video from a local pawn shop where the owners have a Ring camera video. We are seeing those images of the car that Guerrero was driving, the car that, according to a neighbor who tells me, because he knew Guerrero and knew some of the other Colombian members of the community, he says that this car may have belonged to the person who ICE may have been targeting. These are all speculations. These are messages being passed along from one member to the community to another. Why? Because they are afraid of going to the authorities. They're afraid of talking to media. They're telling me, look, we are in grief. We don't know why this happened, especially after they learned, and this is what I'm hearing from the local business owners too, that Guerrero was not the target of surveillance, that he is the father of a 3-year-old girl. Today, our partners in Caracol Noticias in Colombia spoke with Guerrero's father. He was also afraid. He's working with Colombian authorities to repatriate, to be able to come to the U.S., to get a visa, to repatriate his son's body back to Colombia. He says, my son left this country to provide a better life for his daughter and for his wife. I don't understand why this happens. And these are the questions that locals, people protesting here today, are asking too, saying we don't understand why this is happening in our community because we are not the ones saying that ICE should be here removing people to, as you mentioned, what I've heard from protesters and locals, to fulfill any quota, that these are members of their community. And especially if it's somebody who has not committed a crime, who does not have a warrant for their arrest, or that is the wrong person being surveilled. All of those questions are really aggravating this community in Biddeford, Maine, and of course also in Houston and every other community where this has happened. We are trying to piece together from authorities. All DHS has said is that first, they had mentioned that the car had been weaponized. Then the official statement said that they were looking for one person and that Guerrero allegedly tried to get away. The video we're seeing is a car going in circles. We don't have the video of the shooting. We don't have body cam video. This is an investigation that, as lawmakers have highlighted, is becoming incredibly complex.
Lily Luciano with all the details. I appreciate it very, very much. After months of pushing, prosecutors in Minnesota are receiving, at long last, evidence from federal investigators on the deadly shootings during ICE's immigration surge in that state. Attorney for Hennepin County, Minnesota, that's Minneapolis, Mary Moriarty, who's been working with her state's Attorney General Keith Ellison on this matter, joins us now. I'm very glad to have you on the program. What do you have in your possession now, and why do you believe it took so long to get it?
We have some of the physical evidence, including Renee Good's car. We have hard drives containing body cams, statements, and other things. We're in the process, actually, of looking through all of that. So we did get a lot of the physical evidence and the statements that were on a hard drive and also a body cam. Why did it take so long to get it, I think is a good question. When Renee Good was first shot and killed on January 7th, I was on the phone talking to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, and the BCA, and we were all on the same page that we would handle these cases the way we had handled every other case, where it would be a joint investigation. And then the administration came in and stopped that. Since that happened, as you know, we filed a federal lawsuit in Washington, D.C., asking a judge to order the federal government to turn over the evidence in the Renee Good and Alex Preddy shootings and killings and in the shooting of Julio Sosa Solis. But we continue to have conversations because the local partners here, the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, our office, and the BCA, all understand that the way this is supposed to work is the way it's always worked. So those conversations continued. Several weeks ago, we struck up those conversations again, and we were able to share information. We also shared the information that our BCA had collected with the federal government.
So there are 3 cases you name-checked, Mary, and do you have all the evidence you want in all 3, or just the Renee Good?
We have the evidence in all 3. I can't say whether we have all of the evidence because it's voluminous and we're looking at it. We got one of the hard drives from our BCA who got it from the federal government yesterday. And so that's a lot of body cam. I'm assuming that we have what we asked for and what we need and what they have. But we are in the process of looking through all of that and making sure that we have what we need.
And after that review, is there going to be a determination made possibly to bring charges against anyone involved in the killing of any of those 3 Minnesota residents?
There will absolutely be a determination. Here in Minnesota, if a law enforcement officer takes the life of a community member, it is always investigated. Nobody makes a determination of what happened until all of the evidence is in. We are sent the case. We decide whether to charge or to decline. In Minnesota, once an investigation is complete, that investigation is actually posted by the BCA or the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension online so that everybody can see it. We make a decision about whether charges are appropriate or not, and we make that very transparent as to what the decision is and why, because that's really what community members deserve from our government.
Mary, you have heard my reporters talk about the situation in Maine and the situation in Houston. Both instances, officials there are trying to obtain information from the federal government, information it took you months to obtain. What is your advice to them? And also, what is the disposition of your community now that you have that evidence, because this was so obviously traumatic for many weeks in the December, January, February period of Operation Metro Surge?
I think this was momentous for us and our community yesterday because I think people have been losing hope that there would be any accountability at all. I don't know what our charging decision will be, but I now know that we have the evidence to make that decision. So, our community, like other communities, did not ask for an ICE occupation. And then we all saw what happened publicly. We saw the videos of what happened to Renee Good and Alex Preddy. And there was a call in our community for who is here to help us? Can ICE agents just come into our community and shoot and kill someone without any kind of transparency or accountability? So we understand what they're going through in Houston and Maine. We have actually had conversations with the DA in Houston. We stand ready to help. And I will say that's really important because we were the first to have gone through this. And it's complicated. And we have been through it, kind of building the plane as we've been flying it. And we are here to help any jurisdiction that wants our help to understand the process of collecting evidence, filing the lawsuit to get information. So we stand here ready to help.
Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty. Mary, I appreciate your time very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, O'Keefe joins me now from the White House. Ed, what is the White House disposition on this broader topic of aggressive immigration enforcement, particularly removal operations for those who have received deportation orders?
Well, on this word that they're pausing the vehicle stops, Tom Homan, who of course serves as the White House border czar, said it's not a change in policy, just a pause to make sure that everybody that conducts those kinds of stops is properly trained. He was asked a few minutes ago here at the White House by reporters about the dearth of body cameras in all of these incidents, the one in Texas and now the one in Maine, and he blamed Democrats who held up congressional funding and caused a partial government shutdown earlier this year for delaying the funding that then leads to the distribution of and the installation of those cameras on federal agents who are conducting these operations across the country. But he says they are working to get them distributed as quickly as possible to officers across the country. He noted that, for example, hundreds of them were sent to Minnesota after those incidents earlier this year, and they are working to distribute them across the rest of the country. But it is notable the White House has kept somewhat quiet on this one since it first happened. And, of course, there's this other incident now that occurred today, apparently down in Florida, in the St. Augustine area, where a man was apparently running away from immigration agents and was killed by another car. Reports of that still being sorted out. But this flare-up again now has the real potential to refocus attention on immigration policy, remind voters that are upset about this that the administration continues towards that 2,000 per day arrest goal, and that sometimes in the pursuit of that goal, deadly things have happened to people who were being pursued.
And Ed, there was a notable turnabout from the president today on the question of tolls and the Strait of Hormuz. What happened?
Yesterday, he said he wanted a 20% toll on ships passing through there to help pay the United States for protecting it. Today, he reversed course, suggesting that Gulf nations like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE had all reached out, essentially expressing concern and support about this, but then vowing to invest billions of dollars more in the United States, which the president said he was fine with. Take a listen to some of what he had to say.
When I put that out yesterday, because we've been doing that for many, many years, it was never fair to me that we would be guarding the strait when we basically don't take anything. We don't need the oil at all. I was called by different people, different countries, kings and emirs and all of the people that we all know and we all love, and they've been very strong partners. And they said, we'd love to do it a different way. We'd love to invest in the United States. The Gulf states are going to invest a tremendous amount of money into the United States, and that was very satisfactory to me.
But again, unclear where that money would be invested, how much, and by which of those Gulf countries. He mentioned Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, Oman. The other thing to keep in mind, it was his own Secretary of State several weeks back who pointed out that it is illegal to charge tolls in international waters, disputing the idea that Oman and Iran might do that together. That may have contributed to why the president decided to reverse course, because he was either shown that footage or reminded that, in fact, it is illegal to try to collect tolls. Major?
Great stuff as always. Ed O'Keefe, thanks so much. CBS News national security analyst Aaron McClain joins me now. He's also the host of the School of War podcast. I often accuse myself, Aaron, in your presence of being overtly glib. I'm going to be overtly glib one more time. Have we gone with this idea that the president just enunciated of some future investment for protecting the Strait of Hormuz from a MOU to an IOU?
We'll see if those investments come to pass, Major. But the fact is that this policy, perhaps evidenced by the fact that it only lasted about 24 hours, was one of the less sustainable ideas to come from this White House of late. I mean, everything about it. The price itself, 20%. Was a little nuts.
Borderline confiscatory.
We would essentially be imposing a closure of the very Strait of Hormuz that the U.S. Navy is trying to open with that rate. There's the question of international law. There's the question of the propaganda victory to the Iranians, because it sort of blesses their own efforts to collect tolls.
Which what the foreign minister posted on social media yesterday. We agree.
Yeah. It is distinctively Trumpy in the sense that the president is often looking for a way for the United States to get paid one way or the other. And he has a sort of philosophical objection to America sponsoring a system of mutual benefit and the United States benefiting merely as the sponsor. He's not on board with that. He likes the United States to derive direct benefit, but in this case, it wasn't going to work.
So let's put the economics aside for a second. Very kinetic day, fourth day in a row of heavy U.S. airstrikes. Iranians, by my count, sent some kinds of projectiles toward or into Kuwait, Bahrain, and 3 vessels. Yep. This is ramping up, not ramping down, it appears.
Yeah, it's been a week of real escalation. There's real risk of further escalation. What's interesting to me about the American targets being struck is they really do, with sort of onesies and twosies as exceptions here and there, concentrated on the Gulf, on Iran's coast, and on the Strait itself. We just saw reports in Iranian state media of more explosions in Bandar Abbas and Sirak, which are the major port facilities there on the Strait of Hormuz for Iran. This suggests to me that our effort, CENTCOM's effort, is focused on facilitating both the blockade and escort operations through the Strait. We are finally fighting this battle of the Strait of Hormuz that the president desperately wanted to avoid back in March and April. Here we are.
And this afternoon, the blockade took effect again. How is that going to work, and what should we watch for in the next few days?
Yeah, so we are now an hour and 15 minutes or so into the reimposed blockade. We were here. We've been here before. This was where we were from the middle of April to the middle of June before the MOU put us on pause for a while. We are back to dueling blockades. The American blockade, as it functioned the last time around, there will be a line drawn from the Omani coast to essentially the Iranian-Pakistani border on the other side of the water, and Iranian ships or ships bearing Iranian cargo going through that northern route won't be allowed to pass. The United States Navy says it's going to chase them down. It had a fairly strong record of doing that the last time around. Obviously, Iran's going to be working to interdict ships coming through that are not under its control.
And keep your eye on global oil prices. Aaron McLean, thank you very much.
Thanks, Major.
Still to come on the Takeout, Texas Republican Congressman Michael McCaul, the reignited war with Iran we were just talking about, and the timing of new sanctions legislation against Russian oil sales. That was a passion of late Senator Lindsey Graham. Also, 2 Supreme Court justices, Elena Kagan and Amy Coney Barrett, asked Congress to beef up the court's security budget. Justice Barrett said the threat environment has gotten worse and prompted for her difficult conversations with her children. Plus, California Democratic Congressman Khanna and what happened to him in the West Bank. He said settlers detained him as he investigated the plight of Palestinians. Israel has accused him of, quote, a cheap provocation. One of Khanna's aides, who was with him in the West Bank, joins us. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to the Takeout. Lindsey Graham's death has left Ukraine without a visible, vocal Republican ally in the Senate. There are others, but he was really key. We're going to be joined now by Texas Republican Congressman Michael McCaul, who recently visited Ukraine and worked extensively with late Senator Graham. Congressman, good to have you with us, and you can weave your remembrances of Senator Graham into this answer, but you were in Ukraine, far eastern Ukraine. What did you discover there about the disposition of the fighting force on the Ukrainian side, and how likely is it Congress is finally going to put this sanctions legislation together and get it to President Trump?
Well, the tide has turned, and Lindsey and I have been working on this since the invasion, our fight for Ukraine against the aggression by Russia. He knew he was on the right side of history, and it was an honor to work with him. It's so sad he's gone. But in his final days, he announced our Russian sanctions bill that we've been working the last year on, that he's come to consensus with the White House. We were planning to introduce that bill this week, and unfortunately with his passing, that may not happen. We anticipate it hopefully will next week. I can think of no greater tribute or honor to Lindsey than the passage of this bill that he cared so deeply about. To answer your question about the front lines, I was on personal travel, so I could go to the frontline operations, these air assault brigades that were the drone warfare is happening in real time. And what I saw was the Ukrainians capturing Russian-occupied territory. Their drone technology now is the envy of the world. They're the leader in drone technology. We, quite honestly, have a lot to learn, I think, from them. The issue was in Kyiv. Ballistic missiles hitting Kyiv every day. At nighttime in the hotel, you could hear these missiles. The Ukrainians have run out of interceptor Patriot missiles, these interceptors. Zelensky was very upbeat, to answer your question. The frontline troops were very upbeat for 2 reasons. One, they're winning. President Trump likes a winner. And at the NATO summit, handed Ukraine a winner as well by announcing the transfer of these licensing agreements where they can manufacture their own Patriot interceptors. And also just the moral support coming from the White House to Zelensky. I could tell, and I met with him many times, he was particularly upbeat on this visit. They have turned the tide, and this is a time for America to support her.
Congressman, you might have heard this. Earlier today, the president in the Oval Office said on the sanctions bill that there's going to be an effort, he thought, to add Hezbollah and Iran to it. Are you aware of that? Is that likely, and does that complicate the process? Because I know, as you said, it was a year to get this together without Hezbollah and Iran in it.
I mean, look, we're looking at that addition right now. I cannot speak for Lindsey. I know he was very tough on Iran. I would think he would be supportive of sanctions against Iran as well. I think the issue, if I can be honest, Major, is the Democrat support. To Lindsey, Getting the White House support was very important to him, but also he prided himself, as do I in the House, of getting across the aisle support. Mr. Blumenthal, Shaheen, the other Democrat senators. And so this is a delicate maneuver here to add Iran sanctions. Can we keep the coalition we built, House and Senate? I think the worst thing to happen would be to see the bill not to pass. So I think that's an issue that obviously we are in negotiations about right now.
So it's been a pretty heavy day in the war with Iran. Iran has sent missiles into Kuwait, Bahrain. It's struck 3 vessels. This is the 4th day in a row of aggressive U.S. airstrikes. The president has backed away from the 20% tolling initiative he suggested about the Strait of Hormuz yesterday. Where are we?
We're in a battle for the Straits of Hormuz, plain and simple. I think the blockade worked last time. President wanted to give negotiations a chance. They did not work. I actually was never sanguine about negotiations with the continuation of the same regime. I think they will never negotiate in good faith, but we had to try. Now we're back to a blockade. And what's really important here, Major, is almost a similar thing is playing out in Ukraine and Russia, is to take out the launch pads that deliver the Shahed drones. And remember, Russia has the same Shahed drones that Iran made, and they're making them together. So it's the same strategy of trying to take out these launch pads in Iran that are then hitting the oil tankers in the Straits of Hormuz. I'm convinced our military can do that. But, it's I think as long as this regime's in place, we're going to have a very difficult time with the negotiations.
Very quickly then, Congressman, does this have to be a regime change operation ultimately?
Look, I think at the beginning there was a hope, and I know that in addition to that, I'm sure Mr. Netanyahu proposed a plan to knock out the Ayatollah and his leadership in the bunker, and that the people would rise up. The fact is it didn't happen, that we got the same regime in place. I don't think the American people would support us getting bogged down on the ground in Iran. I do think Israel is in a far better position to accomplish that mission if that is the goal. Mossad is, as you know, they are implanted across Iran, and that will take time. I think Iran's calculus, and they're smart, is they found a newfound power that they can close the straits, and they are also acutely aware of the midterm elections and politically what is at stake, which is why I didn't have a whole lot of faith in the negotiations. Now the plan has gone back to military to open the straits and eliminate those launch pads that deliver the Shahed drone.
Congressman Michael McCall, Republican of Texas, I appreciate the time, sir. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, safety at the Supreme Court and for Supreme Court justices. That's a focus on Capitol Hill. We'll explore when we come back. This is The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Thanks for hanging out with us. Supreme Court Justices Elena Kagan and Amy Coney Barrett on Capitol Hill today, urging Congress to boost security funding for the High Court. Here was Justice Barrett on the threat environment.
Around the time of the Dobbs leak, my security detail sent me home with a bulletproof vest, and I carried it into my house, put it into my bedroom, dropped it down on a table, turned around, and my 12-year-old son was standing in the doorway of my bedroom, and he wanted to know what it was and why I had it, and I didn't know how to respond.
CBS News Chief Legal Correspondent Jan Crawford joins us now. Quick refresher to the audience. The Dobbs leak is reference to a leaked opinion in the Dobbs case, which had implications to overturn Roe versus Wade. That's not the only thing that's created a difficult security environment for justices, but it's near the top of the list.
Well, I mean, it's Justice Kagan, obviously the liberal justice, and you had Justice Barrett, the conservative. As Justice Kagan pointed out, that's when we really saw just kind of this explosion of threats targeting the justices, particularly the conservative justices. Remember, Justice Brett Kavanaugh and his family are really, I think, lucky to be alive. The man charged and convicted of attempted assassination, now is in prison. He traveled here from California. So that
wanted to break in, kidnap them, and kill them.
And he was found at the back of Kavanaugh's home in Maryland with a bag full of tools of death, as the court put it. But that really led to like this incredibly heightened threat environment for the justices. They obviously get 24/7 security now, but they need even more security because in that threat environment, we've only seen threats now increase. As Justice Kagan said, again, 38% increased threats this year after a 27% increase last year. And the thing that's happening, Major, is that, yes, conservative justices came under attack after the leak of the Dobbs decision in 2022. But you're getting it now from both sides. I thought both of the justices really did a really compelling job talking about how it's the political rhetoric on the left and the right. They wouldn't point to anyone in particular. Of course, some of the senators and representatives tried to draw that out, and they were like, no, it's both sides, and that's where we are today. And it's not obviously just Supreme Court justices, it's lower court judges as well. And this is for the court itself, but as they also move about the country. That's correct, for their travel and at their homes. I mean, so they're going to be they already have 24/7 protection. And this isn't how it was. I mean, that was you played, obviously, I think, the most compelling part of the hearing when Justice Barrett was talking about how it's affected her personally. I mean, your kid comes in there and goes, oh, wow, Mom, what's this? And then you have to say, like, why do you have to wear it? Yeah. Right. But, also when Justice Kagan was talking about how things had changed since she joined the court in 2010, when they could just drive around themselves, no security needed. Now it's constant around the clock, and they say they need more. They're asking for $14.6 million more.
Jan Crawford, thank you so very, very much. Thanks. Up next, Congressman Ro Khanna, California Democrat, said he was detained by Israeli settlers in the West Bank. I'll talk with someone who was on the trip about what happened and what Israel's saying about what happened. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna of California says he was detained by Israeli settlers during a visit to the West Bank last week. Khanna says his group was held by gunmen for more than an hour until calls to the American embassy led to their release. He accuses the Israeli military of helping the settlers in all this, which Israeli Defense Forces deny. Congressman Khanna is a longtime critic of the Israeli government under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and posted this video on social media yesterday.
They called additional settlers for support and held us captive for 75 minutes, recording videos, laughing at us, and mocking me and my staff. I will never forget their faces.
Cameron Kasky is an aide to the congressman, and he was on the trip and took the photos you just saw. Cameron, I'm glad to have you on the program. As succinctly as you can, tell my audience where you went, what the motive was, and what happened.
So we were in Masafer Yatta, a region in the South Hebron Hills, and we're visiting this elementary school that was EU-funded in the village of Zenuda that had been firebombed by settlers years ago. And our security expert came up to us, pointed at the car, and had a look of serious concern on his face. And in the moment, I didn't realize what was happening. But suddenly I saw young men, somewhere between 17 and 22 years old, with not only like machine guns, but also guns that had silencers on them. And I realized very quickly that we were going to be detained by settlers because in Area C of the occupied West Bank, you'd be hard-pressed to find an area where that was not a serious risk.
And what happened as you were surrounded, and what was the feeling of you, the other contingent, and the congressman?
Well, there were Israeli people in the vehicle who had had experiences with this group before. And if you look up the Hilltop Youth, which many Israeli government officials have condemned as what is essentially a terror organization, you know that these people are not messing around. So I was terrified. I'm a school shooting survivor. I was in the high school in Parkland, Florida that was shot up, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, back in 2018. So this was not exactly a new feeling to me, but it was pretty horrifying because all over the occupied West Bank, there are stories of people who have committed these acts of gun violence, but unlike the shooter from my high school, they have not seen justice. They have not had a trial. So I truly didn't know it was going to happen to us.
So the Israeli ambassador, Michael Leiter, has said many things on social media. I want to give you a chance to respond to them. Congressman Khanna was offered to coordinate his visit with the State of Israel. He did not. He chose to conduct his visit accompanied by Palestinian activists. He went to a closed military zone without permission. He used this incident to talk about genocide and apartheid, libels to other reporters. Those are the allegations. How do you respond to those?
Well, listen, first of all, Jerusalem Post article has debunked a lot of these things, and the Jerusalem Post is not exactly a pro-Palestine paper. But I would say, look, the Israeli military very often declares things closed military zones when they want to operate in a completely lawless way there. And I personally don't know why they go that far, because it's not like there's anybody holding them accountable anyway. But I think it's important for people to understand. A lot of people in the pro-Israel sphere in America and in the state of Israel are very upset about the settler violence. A lot of them abhor it, and there are plenty of Israeli government officials who have been calling for an end to this violence. But what people don't understand is that there is absolutely no daylight between the Israeli state and the settler movement. They are frequently working in coordination, and very often when there are settler attacks and the IDF shows up, they do not arrest any settlers. They arrest the people who are being attacked. And I was around Jewish, American, and Israeli people who had been beaten by settlers only a night before and were arrested by the Israeli police. So this is a serious issue that is beyond just what we've seen in Gaza. In the occupied West Bank, there is an entire way of life that the state of Israel is systematically working to not only dismantle, but in my personal opinion, annihilate.
Cameron, on social media, Representative Josh Gottheimer, a colleague of Congressman Khanna, called this a stunt, a publicity stunt. What was the motive, and how do you respond on behalf of the congressman to the idea or the notion or allegation that this was a stunt?
When American politicians go to the state of Israel, it is not called a stunt. They're considered as though they are visiting our ally and seeing the reality on the ground in the state of Israel. What we were doing was visiting Palestine and visiting the people there who very generously hosted us and told us their own stories on their terms. So often, Israelis and Israeli Americans are given a seat at the table when we are negotiating peace. And that's a good thing, because everybody ought to have a seat at the table. But anytime Palestinians are welcome into any space, it is always in the presence of Israelis who are there to make sure that their side of the story is represented too. And again, we need those conversations. We need Palestinians and Israelis coming to the negotiating table together, or we're never going to get peace. But never in American politics are Palestinians and Palestinians only given the chance to share their human experiences. And that's what Congressman Khanna and I wanted to do. So I would say to Gottheimer, first of all, I know your political motivations, so you're obviously not going to be supportive of us hearing the Palestinian people talk about what they experience on a daily basis. But also, it isn't called a political stunt when people go to the wall in Jerusalem. It isn't called a political stunt when American politicians go see different ways of life in the state of Israel. We were simply trying to visit Palestinians, and it's unprecedented, so I understand it's surprising to people, but that's the truth of it.
Cameron Kasky, part of Ro Khanna's traveling entourage in the West Bank. I appreciate the time. Thank you. Coming up next, according to Gallup, 70% of Americans opposed new data centers, that's for hyperscalers, in their neighborhoods. Our political panel will discuss New York's first in the nation one-year moratorium on those data center construction projects, and whether this is going to resonate in the midterms. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back. Isn't it exciting? It is for me. Political panel time. Let me introduce them to you. You know the hat. You know the face. Democratic strategist, CBS News political contributor Chuck Rocha. Republican strategist, he doesn't have a hat. He's got a face, though. Matt Whitlock. Matt, great to have you.
Good to be with you.
So the iron rule here is if I go to break with it, we start with it. One-year moratorium in New York, data centers, hyperscalers. This is about the power of data, the power of billionaires, politically resonant?
Absolutely. But I also think that there's a lot more to this than people are talking about. I feel like John Fetterman raised an interesting point when he tweeted.
Pennsylvania Democratic Senator.
Pennsylvania Democratic Senator. He tweeted, China wins with this. And I think that it does raise the question of, is this a smart or short-sighted policy? I think it's fair to raise questions. People have a lot of questions. They see data centers pop up really, really quickly.
And they don't know what it's going to do to their utility bills. They don't know what it's going to mean for water usage. Yep. They want some answers. And what strikes me, Matt, and I want to bring you in on this, Chuck, here's an entire industry. They can hire all the PR people on planet Earth.
Yep.
Genuinely. Genuinely.
Yeah.
And they still don't tell their story or explain what's going to happen.
I think that's what needs to happen here, but I also think it's important for people to know when they're getting played. The New York Times even reported that there's lots of signs of foreign influence amplifying anti-data center sentiment. And so it's fair to ask questions, but it's also fair to know when you might be getting played by a foreign op that wants America to be less competitive in things like AI development and build-out.
Chuck?
There's very few things in my 36-year career that I've seen that really motivate both sides of the aisle. And this thing, man, in rural Texas, where they have built a lot of these things, Republicans are taking to the street, like you're talking about, at least the Epstein files. Absolutely. I mean, all around the country, it's a unique dynamic for Democrats because organized labor and the unions are building a lot of these things. They're creating a lot of jobs. And let me explain this. Because, to your point about them having unlimited money, they want these things built fast. So guess what? They're paying a lot of overtime. I've got laborers making $100,000 a year, and they're going to their Democratic allies going, whoa, 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 what are you doing here? Absolutely. While everybody else out in the neighborhoods are going, no, let's go to the street. So that's the conundrum the party is in.
That's exactly right.
So give me a sense, Chuck, what is the short and midterm outcome? Of this conflict.
If you mentioned Texas. If you look at what Gina Hinojosa, who's running as a Democrat against Abbott, who's been there for 1,500 years, she's talking about they should pay for themselves and they shouldn't be using electricity or water that the neighbors have to pay for. Well, that is a really good message to folks if you're trying to find a middle ground while she's out protesting the newly developed ones that are happening in rural Texas.
I think that's the key here is there could be a path forward that, uses innovation to make these work a little bit better. There's also got to be a payoff to the communities. And I think these companies are trying to find ways to make it a win-win situation. But again, people need to know when they're getting played by things like foreign adversaries.
So I want to talk to you about 2 ICE fatal shootings in less than a week, one in Houston and one in Maine. It clearly will reanimate the conversation about tactics, worst of the worst, and what kind of country we're in right now, Chuck.
Look, we're seeing this play out, and it's very disturbing within my community where I spend a lot of time, in the Hispanic community, where there's an anxiety. There's an anxiety of even folks that were Republican Latinos that voted for Donald Trump.
Gravitated there in 2024.
Absolutely, had historic numbers that voted for him. I give, as a Democrat, full knowledge of that. But those folks who I've been talking to in focus groups were like, sure, I wanted a secure border. And yes, I wanted folks deported that were going to come here to harm our country, but this is not what we had in mind.
Matt, this is a Achilles heel, it seems to me.
I think Maine Senator Susan Collins made a notable call to DHS to say, let's cut back on these traffic stops and things that we're seeing a little bit more danger than is necessary. And let's find a way to really focus on the safer apprehensions in ways that we could. There's so many people to focus on. Let's focus on the less dangerous.
But when Angus King, the independent senator from Maine, says in the last year, 200 people were arrested in Maine, 10% of them had criminal records outside of their undocumented status. He said 90% are not the worst of the worst, by definition, by DHS own statistics. There's an issue there.
There's an issue there, but I think countrywide, there's still a strong amount of support in polls for removing illegal immigrants, whether they're criminals or not. It's just the DHS needs to prioritize where it makes sense to have the least danger.
And do you have to die in the process?
There's 21 congressional seats that have more than 30% Latino population. Latino voters will decide the majority in the House. It was looking good for Republicans up until this point, and those numbers have tanked. It ain't just about immigration and ICE, but you have an anxiety of these Gestapos in the neighborhood laid over the economic anxiety we just described with these AI centers, the cost of bread and biscuits, whatever it is. There's a lot of tension on working Americans. It just happens that Latinos are at the lower rung of that, so they're feeling the squeeze the most.
Chuck Rocha, you get the last word. Matt Whitlock, great to have you here. Chuck, nice hat.
Thank you.
Nice blazer.
Ooh, it's summertime.
It's summertime. That's a summertime blazer, folks. Happy Tuesday, everyone. This is The Takeout. You know what we are. Quick reminder, relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. The Daily Report coming your way next.